Once upon a time, in a bustling city, there lived a woman named Victoria. She was a successful entrepreneur with a thriving business that consumed most of her time and energy. Victoria was driven, ambitious, and always striving for more. She was the workaholic type and often had little to no time for her home. Her husband David was not also left out. He had tried to talk to her and also help cover up for her at home, but Victoria was not ready to change. She would leave very early in the morning and return late at night when the kids must have slept off. Sometimes when leaving in the morning, she will fail to make breakfast for both her husband and children. David was left to handle most of the chores in the house before leaving for work. However, Victoria's obsession with her business came at a great cost. She had a family, a husband and 2 young children, whom she neglected and ignored. Her home was a mess, with dirty dishes piled up in the sink, laundry scattered all over the floor, the kitchen was a total mess and the toilet hardly gets cleaned. Victoria's children, Michael and Sophia, were often left to fend for themselves, with no one to care for them or attend to their needs, though their father helped in the little way he could, but that wasn't enough. They would come home from school to an empty house, with no one to greet them or ask about their day or even help out with their assignments. Victoria's husband, David, tried to hold everything together, but he was exhausted and frustrated. He was a businessman who worked hard to provide for his family, but Victoria's neglect and absence were taking a toll on him. Surprisingly, despite Victoria's busy schedule and absence from home, she doesn't contribute a dime for the upkeep of the home. This had led to more than 1,000 quarrels in the house, and since there was no change, David decided to let it be that way. One day, after some colleagues from the office visited Victoria and complained about how dirty her house looked, she decided to hire a house help to take care of the household chores and look after the children. She hired a woman named Mrs. Johnson, who seemed kind and efficient. David had a great relief as Mrs. Johnson was left to take care of all the duties in the house, from the biggest down to the smallest. However, Mrs. Johnson had a dark secret. She was a wicked and evil person, who had a history of manipulating and controlling those around her. She had a particular hatred for children, and she took great pleasure in causing them harm and suffering. As soon as Mrs. Johnson started working for Victoria, she began to exert her evil influence over the household. She would often lock Michael and Sophia in their rooms, and deny them food and water. The children would cry day and night with no one to help them. She would also manipulate David, playing on his fears and anxieties, and turning him against Victoria. At a point, she manipulated David into having an affair with her under the same roof. The children were always sick and had drastically dropped down in health, but Victoria didn't even notice. The children too began to hate on her and wished they didn't have her as a mother. Victoria, oblivious to the evil that was unfolding in her home, continued to focus on her business. She would often leave for work early in the morning, and return late at night, exhausted and unaware of the chaos that Mrs. Johnson had created. As time went on, Michael and Sophia became more and more withdrawn. They would often cry themselves to sleep, and wake up with nightmares. David became increasingly distant and cold, and Victoria's relationship with him began to deteriorate. He had suddenly found solace in the arms of Mrs. Johnson, now ignoring everything about his family. He no longer asks after the children nor provide money for upkeep. He plainly told Victoria to start making the provisions. At first she thought it was a joke, but as time went on, she found out that he was being serious. Victoria tried to talk to him, but nothing came out of it. She had to manage and do the little she could, hoping that David would change. One day, Victoria came home from work only to find out that Mrs. Johnson had disappeared, leaving behind a trail of destruction and chaos. The house was in shambles, and Michael was curled up on the couch, crying and trembling with fear. Victoria was shocked and horrified by what she saw, she asked after Sophia and Michael pointed to the kitchen. Victoria ran into the kitchen, but couldn't find her. She had to ask Michael again, and Michael took him to the kitchen cupboard where Sophia was locked up with a key. Victoria screamed, running around for the key, but by the time she was able to open the cupboard, Sophia was already dead. Victoria couldn't believe her ears as Michael narrated to her all that has been happening behind her. She cried bitterly, and she realized too late that she had made a terrible mistake in hiring Mrs. Johnson, and that her obsession with her business had blinded her to the evil that was unfolding in her home. As Victoria tried to pick up the pieces and rebuild her family, she realized that she had lost something precious and irreplaceable. After what happened, David packed his bag and left with Michael, leaving Victoria to mourn her pain. She had lost the trust and love of her child. She had also lost the respect and admiration of her husband. Victoria lived the rest of her life in pain and regret. Victoria's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition and the importance of balance in life. It shows that success is not just about achieving our goals, but also about the relationships we build and the people we touch along the way.